Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We will begin in 8 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. We will begin in 7 minutes. Welcome, everyone. We will begin in 6 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. We will begin in 5 minutes. Welcome, everyone. We will begin in 4 minutes. Welcome, everyone. We will begin in 3 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. We will begin in 2 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. We will begin in 1 minute.
Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement in order to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Patton, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunity for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees today, and a special thank you to Michael Anthony, Victoria Nowinski, and the entire Flexera team. This afternoon on the agenda, we will get to hear from our panelists. Then we will have a Q&A session. We will also be popping in a few poll questions as we go, and we definitely want to hear from you all. So please submit questions of your own in the Q&A chat below. That being said, if you do want to receive your CPE credits, just make sure that you answer the poll questions as they come up throughout today's discussion. And now moving on to panelist introductions, I would love it if you all could please come on camera and go ahead and unmute yourself when I call your name. Please introduce yourself, as I know we have some first timers here on our panel today. So who you are, what your role is, what agency you're with, and anything else that you would like to share with our audience up top. Now would be the time to do so. And with that, let's kick it off with Dr. Kevin Marlowe, please.
Hey, thanks, Kirsten. I'm Kevin Marlowe. I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs, where I'm the Director of Service Delivery Management, which means I manage VA's IT project managers. At any given moment, we're tracking between 200 and 300 nationwide IT projects, and I try to keep track of them and keep the balls in the air, such as it is. I'm a retired Navy officer. I've worked for NASA and DoD. I've been with the VA for a little more than a decade, and I'm thrilled to be here today. Thanks.
Thank you. Great to have you here. And moving right along, we will hear from GUIDO CROCKETT next.
Howdy, everybody. So GUIDO, I'm the CTO and founder for Bespin. We're the second largest software factory in the Air Force. We work with a bunch of different services as well as OSD. And our whole goal is to be the enterprise software factory to deliver applications very, very rapidly across any kind of environment, very targeted on cloud, building repeatable pathways to prod with full continuous ATO, and essentially streamlining the ability to deliver capabilities to our warfighters. In addition to that, we've have several other pieces like Digital University, which is building and maintaining our men and women, which is essentially our human supply chain in the IT fields. It's across 10 different cyber schools to ensure that. And also retired military, long time spec ops guy, intel guy, just anything with IT. Happy to be here.
Great, I like your background. And next, let's hear from Sean Bronn, please.
Good afternoon, Kirsten, and welcome to the webinar, everybody, and participating. I am Sean Bronn. I'm the Chief Information Officer at the Social Security Administration. While many of you know us as the nation's social insurance retirement program, we also administer disability insurance programs and supplemental security income programs. We have about 70 million monthly beneficiaries and SSI recipients. Pay cash benefits to those beneficiaries and recipients to a total of about $1 trillion each year. I have oversight of approximately 3,000 federal employees and about 2,000 more contractors that help us deliver that mission. Happy to be here today to talk to you.
Thanks, Sean. Happy to have you here. And then let's move on over to Mendez next.
Hey, good morning, or actually good afternoon. My name is Mendez, and I am the CIO for the Department of Commerce. As such, I'm responsible for the technology portfolio for the Commerce Department proper and all of its bureaus, including well-known organizations such as NOAA, that runs our National Weather Service, amongst other things. The Census Bureau, of course, that conducts our decennials and other surveys. NIST, which is the organization responsible for establishing standards in that technology arena. The Patent and Trade Office that deals with all of the patent and trademarks for the United States, and a myriad of other smaller bureaus, all of them having very important relationships with the American population, our stakeholders, our taxpayers, and also entities abroad as needed. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And to wrap up intros, we will hear from Dave Melnick next.
Yeah, hi. My name is Dave Melnick, and I'm a retired federal executive. I did 32 years with the U.S. Navy, the Naval Research Lab, as well as the Defense Information Systems Agency. And over the course of my career, I saw IT and the DoD go from current loop teletypes and water-cooled MIL standard mainframe computer shipboard to modern IT, and I participated in that modernization. At the end of my career, I was the Chief Technology Officer at DISA and drove innovations in cybersecurity, IT, as well as networking. And I'm really happy to be here today. I work part-time as a consultant now, so anything that keeps me busy.
Great, thank you, Dave. And while you have the floor, we're going to kick it off with you first for our first question that I want to ask, which is, what is IT situational awareness, and what are some steps that agencies can do to ensure a full scope of the IT landscape? So anything you can share with us on that topic, starting with you.
So to make it very simplistic, IT situational awareness is knowing what you've got, what the state of it is, and how it's configured. And it's essential to everything we do in information technology, both in the federal government as well as in industry. You need to know what you have so you can manage it. You need to know how it's configured so you can defend it. You need to know what the software assets are on that infrastructure so that you understand what you need to budget for it and what you need to upgrade. And things have become very complicated in the past 10 years or so as we've moved to a software as a service and cloud-based environment, because now it isn't sufficient just to have situational awareness of what you own, but it's also critical that you have situational awareness of what you're paying for, what you use, and also be able to play what if with what you might use. So this is foundational to digital modernization. And if you aren't thinking about IT situational awareness, you're missing really the foundation of what you need to do.
Thank you. And Sean, do you have anything to tack on to that response?
Kirsten, sure. I think Dave did a great job. What I would add is, we're very much in a global economy and a global supply chain. IT situational awareness is a 24/7, 365-day chore. Has to be global in scope. While most of our Social Security beneficiaries are in fact domestic, we do provide service at foreign benefit offices across the globe for folks that are entitled to benefit who live abroad. I would say beyond what Dave mentioned, situational awareness includes heightened awareness about, change control and change management on your IT enterprise. It includes robust endpoint detection and response as part of the situational awareness. It also includes ongoing and continuous supply chain risk management. Not only knowing what you have added to your network, but what's in what you have added in the network. Recently, we've been calling this the software bill of materials. All of us rely on a variety of commercial products to run our enterprise, and we need to know all the pieces and parts of those commercial products. Thank you.
Thank you. And Andre, I saw you came off mute. Did you have anything additional you'd like to respond with?
Yeah, no, these are all excellent points. I would add that we need to be very aware of our personnel complement, both FTEs and contractors, because their skill sets and their necessary evolution of those skill sets is absolutely essential as we migrate technologies, as we move from legacy platforms into, for example, cloud environments and SaaS environments. And so knowing what you have on board in terms of FTEs and contractors, and also their training requirements in terms of executing a seamless migration into new environments is very important as well.
Thank you, Andre. And sticking with this topic, Kevin, I'd like to ask you, how is your agency currently gaining insight into what you have in your environment, what the costs are, how to remediate, and how to optimize it as well?
Yeah, great question, Kirsten. Thanks, and a good follow-on to the prior topic. I liked what Andre said with respect to capturing the full spectrum of the situation, and I'd add that it's not sufficient just to have it and understand it. You need to act on it as well. The VA CIO likes to talk a lot about engineering excellence, and our focus is how do we move the needle to make things better on these situations that we understand, that we understand what we've got. The question is, how do we make the environment better for our end users? In most IT shops, I think you'd find that the approach to gaining insight into the environment is one of discovery, aggregation, maybe pattern recognition. There's some visualization, there's a communications aspect. All of those are right out of the box, the kinds of things any consultant would tell you to do. And I think it's interesting to see how different agencies do it. Within VA, for example, without spending all day on it, because we could, we've spent a lot of time and effort over the last couple of years into developing a standard configuration management database, what we call a CMDB in the biz. And the CMDB, in an organization the size of VA, where everything is at scale, 500,000 endpoints, 2,000 offices, it's been an enormous lift. Stovepipes, architectures, processes, the maintenance is not a disaster, but could be if we let it go. And it's worth noting that it wasn't sufficient just to purchase the good tools for it. There's a whole mindset around the idea of managing your situation, of understanding the configuration of your IT. You've got to do more than just discovery. There's the relationships that have to be built between all the components in your environment. The technical services, the underlying systems, the contracting, and the people who use the systems are all part of it. Of course, the applications that lay on top. And I love Dave's comment about the future applications. We've got to be thinking about what we're going to do with this next and how we're going to fit all that into it. And it is astounding to me every day to find a new nuance, something we didn't know about, a stovepipe, a problem that we didn't anticipate, in gaining a better view of what our situation looks like. Never a dull moment.
Thank you. And Dave, I see your comment that you'd like to tag on to the end of this one.
Yeah, so that was a sort of a great status. I think it highlights what is very important, that you can't just do this on your own with manual techniques. So believe it or not, it wasn't that many years ago. About a dozen years ago, I was a spectator in something that happened in the Defense Department networks, and I would sit in video teleconferences for about a week straight and watch 4-stars looking at spreadsheets, talking about the number of computers in their organization and arguing over whether that was, 420,000 or 418,000. So we've come a long way since then. Configuration management databases are great, but believe it or not, in my experience, and I fielded and then sustained a global network for the DoD, our configuration management database was always wrong. So you have to have automated techniques for discovery and reconciliation, and also automated tools for helping you make good decisions out of that, make sense out of that. There are a number of commercial solutions, whether they be software or software as a service. Our sponsor today is actually one of those, but this is something that I think agencies need to consider making investments in, as opposed to trying to develop it organically.
Excellent. Thank you, Dave. So Guido, I want to pose to you another question, pivoting slightly, but as you are beginning to address zero trust requirements, what type of analysis are you conducting internally in order to understand your current landscape of software, hardware, and usage patterns?
So that's a hard one. It's, first of all, it's always changing. Like, everybody else has said before, you're always trying to hit this moving target. Really, anything that we do, we go through and do user research, and we're doing all our discovery first and foremost before we're trying to put a product first, because products are just a tool. Like, and if you've got the wrong tool for the job, then you're not going to be, solving the problem effectively. But then going back and actually understanding how the pieces fit together once you do discovery, what the dependencies are, how your second and third order effects are, and if you have any of those dependencies that are, third-party dependencies as well. All of that tied into, to that usage pattern then gets documented. And then it gets refined in the process. We do, oftentimes we'll do an experiment, then a prototype, so that we understand as we go and we don't get to the end in this waterfall methodology, to be able to have to go all the way back to the starting line, which allows us to rapidly essentially put out these capabilities in zero trust. And then the second piece is really strictly adhering to, leaning left on our security practices for the zero trust architecture. We're doing a lot of different things in the DoD now, as far as like, we're not just trying to give everybody the least amount of privilege to access it, like understanding what that looks like, how it looks, and then how it needs to adapt has been more effectively. And then shifting left on all the penetration testing, being able to automate those things, being able to automate all our security and validation processes, especially as we push through the CI/CD process. All of those really kind of give in to that architecture, and then being able to understand how we audit to make sure that we're doing a checks and balances on what we assumed was the right thing.
Great, thank you. I think if there's anybody else on our panel who would like to add additional, response to that question, Dave, go ahead.
So at the risk of having everybody throw stuff at me virtually, we're at the peak of inflated expectations on zero trust right now. So zero trust is going to solve all of our cybersecurity problems, and it's going to do that very quickly. And since it's a software-only solution, it's going to cost nothing, and you'll be able to throw all your firewalls away. I think that's sort of what many CIOs have been hearing, and that just isn't true. Zero trust is not a new concept. So I was involved with the first firewall fielding programs in the Navy in the early 90s. And at that time, we knew that firewalls were not a good solution. They were a stopgap. We, in fact, knew when we started looking at the firewall technology that it was going to hurt us, because the concept of trusted and untrusted interfaces was something that was inculcated in those firewalls, and that stuck, right? Organizations said, untrusted is outside, trusted is inside. I put this magic box in and everything's fine. Well, that's not the case. In terms of the zero trust models that we're seeing out of the NIST special publication, which features policy decision points and policy enforcement points, that's not novel either. So we had a security architecture in the DoD in the early 2000s that was based on that same approach to securing access to resources, data, if you will. And for better or worse, after multiple millions of dollars of investments, that effort failed. So we gotta understand that this is going to be a hard problem. It's not simply about buying a widget and installing it. It's about rethinking how we regard security for our data and on our networks. And the other issue that's going to be very challenging as we migrate to zero trust is even though we're going to get rid of this notion of trust domains and we're going to always check, validate before we give access, organizations are going to tend to focus internally, right? So they're going to develop solutions that allow them to control access for the people in their organizations. That's the easy part. The hard part is how do you do that between organizations? How do you cross trust boundaries or not trust boundaries anymore, but boundaries where you're going to have different policies, different attributes, etc. So there is a lot to follow. And the last thing I'd like to say about zero trust is, now, you're not going to be able to get rid of your intrusion detection systems. You're not going to be able to get rid of your red teams and blue teams and cyber protection teams. And you're going to still really care about things like IT management and software asset management and bill of materials to understand what the risk profile of your installed base is. So there is much more to follow on zero trust.
Thank you, Dave. And let's jump over to Andre next.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. I think that the Trojan horse proved that being inside the network was not necessarily a safety protection, and of course insider threats continue to exist throughout history and proven to have been extremely damaging to organizations and nation states at large. We also have the issue of, within our organizations, these large organizations, especially the ones with bureaus and somewhat eclectic missions and somewhat stovepiped and siloed IT environments. You also have organizational units inside of those bureaus that themselves have a measure of IT deployments, right? That also have to be properly accounted for and secured. And so that adds another dimension because there's sometimes not always the exact same level of control that you would find in the centralized IT environment. Despite all of the FITAR regulations and all of the efforts, it is important that we maintain a very close eye on IT efforts that are not driven from a central standpoint, but that nevertheless can pose risks. In the case of commerce, we also have issues where we have some very, very interesting endpoints that present some unique challenges. Buoys in the middle of the ocean for NOAA, sensors in satellites that are sometimes millions of miles away from the atmosphere looking at solar data. And so all of those present a tremendous opportunity for data collection, but at the same time, present some degree of challenge in terms of ensuring that they're part of an overall well thought out zero trust architecture that does not have weak points, because the weakest link is of course always the one that ends up getting exploited. And of course the issue of supply chain is going to continue to present a challenge, because no agency wants to have to test every single issuance of software by our trusted vendors prior to installation. The burden would be enormous. But at the same time, as demonstrated over the last couple of years, the vendors have not always been, top and front and center in terms of ensuring that that was the case. So that needs to be a continued source of worry, and as a result of attention and effort in terms of securing the entire supply chain for ubiquitous software packages that are used throughout the federal government and private institutions.
Thank you, Andre. Now I'm about to call for our first poll question, but before I do that, is there anything anyone else on the panel would like to say in regards to addressing zero trust concerns? If not, that is okay. We'll just move right along. All right, poll question number 1, please put it up on our screen. And as a reminder to our audience, please submit questions of your own as well if you'd like us to address those. Poll question number 1, what percentage of your agency's applications would you estimate are in the cloud? So please take a moment to respond to that. And then I am going to gear us up for my next question. Sean, maybe you can start us off with my next question that I'm about to pose. Should the federal government prioritize accurate data for modernization? And if so, why?
Great question, Kirsten. Kirsten, and I would say in a word, yes, that's foundational for everything we do. For most of us in the federal sector, whether we're civilian, military, health, or human services or other, data is the lifeblood of our core mission. It's the engine, it's the oil that makes the engine run. In our case, the Social Security Administration, our core mission boils down to the right check in the right amount to the right person at the right time. That depends on data collected over decades. We base our benefits on an individual's earnings history over their lifetime. And so we have to make sure that data is accurate, complete, and that it's governed properly. You know, that would be my final point, Kirsten. It's not all technology. Data integrity is based on a sound enterprise data management strategy with practical and applied data governance. In the Social Security Administration, that's a partnership between me and my team in the IT arena and our Chief Data Officer. And we work on a continuous basis to make sure that we're taking our data as one of the agency's most strategic assets. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other panelists like to shed some light? Oh, go ahead, Guido.
Yeah, I'd like to, talk about, so the data accuracy thing is something that we did a lot in the Intel community. It was first and foremost, because without the data, I couldn't do anything. Like, that is really the thing that drives the capability of the mission planning, all of that. So I feel like we need to prioritize the accuracy as well as the availability, the meta, all those different pieces, because if I build applications and I can't get access to the data, that also means that it's useless. And I'm aiding China or near peer adversaries who, by not giving the people I need to be able to access that data. So it's not just about the data accuracy, but the extensibility, the democratization of the data, getting in there and doing the audit trails to ensure you're doing the right thing, having the proper meta so that you're categorizing and bringing the data in enterprise level, and then not creating stovepipes is the other piece. We, the government, love to make stovepipes because they're easier to ATO or to security and things like that. But understanding the data strategy and building extensibility first is really where we need to focus in order to be effective.
Thank you. And Kevin, over to you.
I wanted to hammer a little bit on Sean's point about data governance. The prioritization is one thing, but the lack of governance for data creates a problem all its own. It's a hydra that explodes out of nowhere and takes control of your data if you don't have it right, because the lack of governance then begets more governance. There are individual pockets of governance that pop up and consider themselves authoritative, and then it's a question of which one is more authoritative than another. And then you have the terrible problem of trying to prioritize between two organizations' assessments of the same thing and trying to decide which one deserves more IT attention. It's a real problem. Thanks for bringing it up, Sean.
Thank you. And Dave, did you have anything additional to add?
Yeah, while I agree 100% with what my three co-panelists said, I actually took this question a little bit different. I was taking it in terms of prioritizing accurate data on the systems we're trying to modernize. And I think that's essential, right? We've got to know what we have. We've got to know what we're paying for it. We've got to know what the ROI is on those investments, whether they be things that we own or things we're paying for on a minute-by-minute basis, so that we can make good decisions for IT modernization. So just a little bit different spin on that. But I think that as we modernize, if you don't know what you have, you're just going to throw money at it and it's never going to get any better.
Thank you. Andre, go ahead.
And so, first of all, just exceptional insight. I love it. Absolutely love it. I would like to make a little bit of a differentiation between data that is more, that has an historical component and remains in place somewhat unchanged, and then data that is more transactional in nature and that only has relevance over a very short period of time. For example, with the national weather systems, the data that is being constantly collected by the sensors and then presented in our displays to all of the individuals out there who are monitoring tornado activity, hurricane activity, and so on and so forth, is data that is highly transactional. It is highly deciduous, but nevertheless, it has tremendous implications from a life limb standpoint in terms of warning people and presenting them with opportunities. And so that type of data, becomes extremely important as well, although it has completely different characteristics. And the other issue that Guido mentioned a little bit in terms of the metadata itself is the fact that we are trying to leverage data across boundaries of Department of Commerce bureaus, for example. Data that at one point in time was never analyzed conjointly. There was never really leveraged in synergistic terms for what it can bring to the table, additional data points that people never thought about, including, for example, economic data, weather data, census data, and bringing it all together into an analysis that presents an accurate picture. And then, of course, the all-important presentation layer, right? Because data, being analyzed by scientists, as one set of requirements, data that can be visualized and made to be easily consumable by our stakeholders goes to another dimension in terms of ensuring that that not only are we using it properly, but that we're making it available to people that can actually leverage it in their day-to-day, up to and including saving their lives by knowing exactly when the next hurricane or tornado is going to hit, or the next tsunami, for example, in terms of the tsunami warning system. So it always surprises me how much emphasis there is on data today, because of course, data has always been the raison d'etre for computers, right? Is to process data, to generate data. But at the same time, it always amazes me how little importance it was paid to data before, because as relevant as it was, there was never all of the governance and issues that everybody talked about already that was applied to it. So it was data was generated in silos, analyzed in silos, used in silos, without all of this system of systems approach that now is becoming more pervasive. Fascinating topic.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's go ahead and pop up our second poll question here. What is your top challenge as it relates to the webinar today? And your options include mitigating risk and increasing cybersecurity, fostering innovation without increasing budgets, or analyzing how to move to the cloud efficiently and cost effectively. So please take a moment to respond to that. And Andre, I haven't began a question with you yet, so I'm going to ask you this one, sticking with challenges. But in order to migrate and modernize in the cloud, what are some of the steps that agencies are taking to gain visibility into the process of cloud migration? So is it manual alternative analysis with consultants, or is it being done with tools, or something else that you can share with us?
Quite honestly, I think it's a combination of all of the above. It starts with knowing, what you have at hand, right? And then, how are you going to be able to leverage the cloud in order to a large degree, create abstraction layers of all of the commodity issues that do not present value at what your agency is trying to accomplish, so that you free up resources to leverage those upper layers of the stack in terms of applications that are specific to the organization, and therefore you're able to increase the amount of money that you can spend on your mission rather than an O&M type of environment. It's one of the main reasons for moving from a CapEx to an OpEx environment is to be able to do that, availing yourself of the talent that exists with vendors on their platforms that by and large far exceeds the talent that you could have in your agency at any given time for administering a common platform. Let's say, for example, with Exchange and Office 365, why should we go through the trouble of identifying resources and everything else to run an Exchange environment when there are experts whose shareholder value are dependent on creating an environment that is safe, secure, available, and all of the attributes that you want in an IT system. The other thing is the cloud is not a static environment. The first organization I took to the cloud was in 2009 with Special Olympics, right? Then a government agency in 2014 with the Broadcasting Board of Governors. And I can tell you that what we did in 2009 and what we did in 2014 is completely different. What we're doing today is completely different because the cloud is evolving at a very rapid pace, not only as the vendors and the products mature, but also as we continue to learn lessons in terms of effectuating these transactions. And now we learn how to, create holistic environments in our cloud deployments that not only are capable of integrating our in-house presence with the outside presence, are capable of integrating multi-cloud environments, but are also capable of doing the type of migrations that we talked earlier on, for example, in terms of moving into a zero trust architecture, so that you do not have, a sort of hiccups in the deployment, because you keep having to introduce new stuff at every step. So you have to keep a very close eye on the developments and then think about it in a holistic environment so that you have a steady stream of migrations and deployment of the cloud infrastructure, even as it evolves and as your needs evolve and your organization's needs evolve. And so, there's no magic bullet. There's not a consultant who's going to come in and tell you, here's your 14 steps that you need to do in order to do this. And there never will be. There's an enormous amount of requirements for subject matter expertise in terms of your application portfolio and your entire environment. And then a keen awareness and continuous study of the landscape in the cloud environment to know the art of the possible in terms of what's being offered, both from a platform standpoint and also from a software standpoint. So a very challenging, but at the same time, very exciting environment because it allows you continually increase the amount of focus you pay to the mission of the agency or bureau, rather than running servers, running storage, and all of that stuff. So fantastic time to be in IT and to be in part of this equation.
Thank you. And Sean, let's bounce over to you next.
Thank you. I would agree with everything Andre said, and just highlight one point of it. He mentioned a multi-cloud environment. I would venture that most of our audience, like Social Security Administration, does operate in a hybrid multi-cloud environment. So it's not the cloud, it's a cloud, and finding a fit for purpose for your application or your tech stack in the right cloud. We have on-prem and vendor hosted environments. I think most of us on the Fed side here have a presence with multiple cloud service providers, and that's a strategic advantage in a number of ways. So not one set of playbook or one singular environment. It's dynamic, as Andre mentioned. Which provides flexible opportunities for us to take advantage of the elasticity of the cloud, which gives us flexibility in meeting core mission responsibilities.
Thank you, Sean. Go ahead, Dave.
So just one thing I'd like to mention, because I saw this in my time at DoD. Often people think of cloud as a way to save money, and I'm gonna poke at Guido a little bit, because he'll tell us that it's about speed and agility, and you can do things with the cloud you couldn't possibly do otherwise. The way we used to build systems in the DoD is step one: get budget approval to get procurement funds to buy development machines, and a year later we'd finally get them installed and be able to start developing. As opposed with the cloud, you can put your government credit card down and your developers are productive the same day. So it's not just about money, although it can save you a lot of money depending on the scenario. It's about speed, agility, and accomplishing the mission.
Yeah, and to jump in, definitely agree with everything the previous panelists have said. That's perfect. The one thing I really want to stress, because there's been a lot of sharks versus the jets, like the left side versus the right of like cloud native versus agnostic in a platform and everything. And if you're tracking the DoD, it's platform wars, all over again. Like everybody gets their own platform. Focus on so some of the benefits of the cloud that the previous speakers have talked about is, essentially the agility, the optionality, and the cost of all those different things that tie into the flexibility of being able to deliver rapid capabilities like tomorrow, like actually being able to do that. And, also demystifying of what it takes to get to the cloud. You really need to understand what your target environment is, what your use case is to really shape your cloud architecture, and do not focus on one part solely. Like you need to be able to diversify to really hit your target audience at a high level. That doesn't mean you can't start small, like, hey, just do some native managed pieces, and like build blueprints from that and scale and everything, because that's going to allow you to learn faster. But understand your cloud environment, understand your agility, optionality, and your cost factors, and being able to rapidly secure those as you go through the process.
Great, thank you. Great discussion. Okay, we have an audience question from David George. This is not addressed to anyone in particular, so please feel free to come off mute if you'd like to respond. But his question is, how big a role would you say that Edge plays as part of the overall digital transformation strategy for the federal space? Go for it, Dave.
Not large enough of a role, and I could interpret Edge. It's two ways. I could interpret Edge as the humans and their way they interact with the IT infrastructure, and oftentimes we ignore them in the federal space, right? We give them crappy old computers, and they take forever to boot, and they have so much security lumped on them they can't possibly accomplish their mission. But we do spend a lot of money on the cloud. Now, if we're talking edge in terms of edge computing as a way to not necessarily replace the cloud, but as a way to sort of complement cloud computing, I think that is absolutely a direction Fed has to be looking at, right? Especially given that we have forward deployed forces. So I worked for the Navy for many years, and unfortunately, the Navy doesn't trail fiber behind their aircraft carriers when they leave the pier. And sometimes they don't have any communications at all, especially when people are shooting at them.
Thank you. Anyone else like to respond? Andre?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, because if you think about the history of computing, it has always been this interplay between the edge and centralized environments, and is dependent on the cost of CPUs, the cost of storage, and the availability of bandwidth throughout history, right? You look at mainframes, and there was no edge computing, 3278 terminals over RS-232, because there was no network, because there was no storage at the edge, there was no CPU at the edge, besides a little graphics display. Then you get into client server, and you have a lot of edge, right? Because computers storage is cheap or cheaper. CPUs are cheap, but there's not a lot of bandwidth. And then you get to the internet and the cloud, and what you have is bandwidth being almost absolutely ubiquitous, right? And therefore allowing for centralization of a lot of functions, because the edge only needs to interface with the cloud in order to bring data back and forth, and presentation layer and everything else. And so I think that we're going to continue to see that. But with the caveat that, as Dave mentioned, when you talk about systems that are not connected at all times, you have different interactions that are necessary. So the edge versus centralization is sort of an ebb and flow that will continue to reflect the interplay between CPU, storage, and bandwidth availability and cost for different equations and different mission sets.
Fantastic, thank you. And to our panelists, I'd like you to turn your attention over to our audience questions. We just had quite a few come in, so if you'd like to respond to any of those, I'll open the floor up in just a moment. But let's go ahead and pop up our third and final poll question before we address that. Here we go. When it comes to gaining better situational awareness for your agency, which of these insights is most important to your organization at this time? Options include gaining better visibility of what you have in your environment as it relates to risk and or lifecycle planning, or what are the associated licensing rights and how they're being used, or moving to the cloud more efficiently. Please go ahead and respond to those if you'd like to receive your CPE credit. Now, let's our audience questions again. Richard Holliger had a few questions here. Did anyone on our panel like to was able to review that, would like to respond to the first one? Looks like he had question 1 plus a follow-up, and then question number 2.
So in terms of that first question, it's an application manager system rep. That's a tough one, right? Because you potentially don't own the budget. You don't drive priorities in the organization. But if you have cataloged what you have and how you're using it and what's effective, I think you need to use that information to drive leadership in your organization to make good decisions. And I know we have a number of CIOs here, and I think that them having this information come up through the organization is good, but in the end, CIOs are going to have to make these investment decisions.
Thank you, Dave. Anyone else? Go ahead.
I would take a crack at the last one.
Okay.
For example, with the bare metal servers and owning the infrastructure, I think that there's still one area, and I don't know how long this is going to continue to be true, where the price performance ratio of the cloud is still in play with having your own infrastructure, and that is in the arena of supercomputing. The amount of power that is represented in supercomputers, the amount of data going in and out, egress, and so on and so forth, with fees and everything else associated with that, is still a situation where owning your own infrastructure might still make sense. Now, ask me if that is the truth 3 years from now, and I don't know, possibly, but I wouldn't be surprised if that equation reverses. But right now, there's no doubt in my mind that that's still an equation that needs to be that needs to be very properly analyzed, because the costs could be very, very substantial. It might change in the future, but for now, I think that's the case.
Great, excellent, thank you. And then the last question I saw come through is on best practices to provide digital awareness around processes like DevSecOps. Would any of our panelists like to respond to that question before we move on?
Kirsten, this is Sean. I'll take a crack at it. I would say DevSecOps is very much an ongoing journey. It no doubt requires skill sets that are different than we've used in the past, and tools that we've used not used in the past. But I would say some of the key ingredients are celebrate your success. It's going to be hard to get to the perfect DevSecOps life cycle, or processes that you feel are fully optimized all the time. But you can celebrate each step of the journey, which helps build momentum and confidence of those that are charged with executing the processes. And it also attracts followers. I mean, people are a little bit intimidated at the start of hey, I might be taking on more responsibility than I've had in the past. But they're also, when they see that success, feel empowered to deliver better, faster, cheaper, with more security. And I think that the heart of DevSecOps is in fact the tools and the processes, but it's also the collaboration. It's fewer handoffs and more collaboration.
Thank you, Sean. And Andre?
Yeah, I think that that's an excellent point that Sean brought up. I find it a little puzzling that in 2022, there are still, a number of individuals that are arguing about the benefits of the cloud and that keep bringing up the issues of security and that type of scenario. And the reality is that, security is a challenge regardless of where you're operating your environment. And that the situation has dramatically, increased in terms of security in the cloud over the last few years. It's important to realize that as technology leaders, the objective is not to reach a consensus, but to drive a consensus. And I think that is a critical difference in terms of leadership, because if you try to reach a consensus in an environment where the majority of the individuals are very much pro status quo, you're going to run into difficulties in actually innovating and moving things as fast as they should be moving, considering how fast the industry is moving. And so it's important that as industry leaders and as IT leaders, we do our due diligence in terms of all of these, but take bold steps in terms of assuring that we're not leaving anything on the table by virtue of continuing to be afraid or leveraging fears that might not be all founded just because they are unknown until we do the research. So I think it's important that we continue to drive consensus as a general practice for IT executives.
Thank you, Andre. And Kevin?
One more thought on the DevSecOps problem, or question, I guess. VA has been through an interesting journey over the last couple of years with organizing IT around DevSecOps, and we're now on the verge of unorganizing it that way. We're still doing it. We track, we teach, we preach, we operate that way internal to OI&T. But to the question about digital awareness of the processes, one of the things we found is that it confuses end users. And so our new CIO has asked us to focus on not exposing that part of the problem to our customers. Our customers need to see us being operationally excellent. They need to see us delivering an end user experience that they want to be delighted with. They want to get their jobs done. They want to see that we have a vision and that we're executing it. How we execute it, I think, is entirely up to us. We're convinced that DevOps, DevSecOps is the right answer, but they don't need to see it in the widget. So we'll train that internally and we'll preach it within the walls, but we won't necessarily bring it outside as much as we used to.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, this may be our last question on the panel since we're coming up on time, but Kevin, I wanted to start with you on this one. So we're hearing from some of the intelligence agencies about reducing the attack surface of their IT environment, essentially taking a close look at and removing or upgrading the technical debt so that cyber criminals have less to work with. What are you seeing around similar efforts within your own agency?
Oh, the stories I could tell, but we are limited for time. So we'll focus just a little bit here. A VA tracks the cost of infrastructure refresh and modernization very closely. We have developed dashboards around it. We brief it to the executive team. It seems like constantly. And I can tell you that we've figured out that it costs us about $500 million a year just to keep up with modernization within the VA. And in FY22, for the very first time, IT was funded to do that. We've been kind of taking it out of hide for years. But for FY22, our modernization program was fully funded, and we're able to keep up with some endpoint modernization and some growth and some legislative mandates and some sustainment. Break, is that going to happen in 23, 24, 25, 26? I don't know. But if it doesn't, then we get into the problem of the risk surface. And how do we then mitigate the risk problem? One other point real quick is that we don't own all of the systems within VA. We have an enormous shadow IT environment where healthcare systems, benefit systems are developed by, funded by, supported by the administrations in VA that are not IT, and they are certainly part of our risk surface. We probably have something like 1,500 systems running a horrendously old operating system that I will not name here, still online today. That system is end of life, end of support, end of extended maintenance, but it's running healthcare systems today. And as far as the customer is concerned, they're running just fine. So we as IT have a problem that we need to help them understand that we are in together, because when that healthcare system goes down in the middle of the night, we're going to get the call first. And it's not going to do to say you should have replaced that 10 years ago. We've got to be on top of that as an organization, as an enterprise, and we're all in this together.
Thank you, Kevin. And is there anyone else on our panel who'd like to respond or tack on to that response? Okay, well, maybe we have, oh, go ahead, Sean.
Kirsten, I was just going to say that, that problem that Kevin just described, I think all of us have experienced it at some point or another. And, it's always been my experience that the customer is always going to favor more features and functionalities rather than fixing something that they think is working fine. And so our responsibility then is to identify in practical terms, what is the potential business risk of that antiquated or legacy technology. Technical debt is often invisible, even though it can be monetized, even though it can be reported recurringly. And we have some similar dashboards to what Kevin described. But it has to be made visible and explicit in order for the business leadership in order to commit to invest the resources to address it.
Thank you. And go ahead, Andre.
Yeah, absolutely right, spot on. The problem with these legacy environments in need of modernization is that they become, the costs and expenses and risk associated with them becomes almost asymptotic. And they take away from every single other effort. And that it becomes a really big problem if you're dealing with the need for agility, the need for better service, the need for better mission fulfillment. I can tell you one of our bureaus is both on the edge of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and also has algol running into some of the environments, right? And 95% of the folks in this call probably have never heard of algol because it is that old, right? But there's all of the expense associated with that. The fact that the maintenance window went out with the last millennium, and we're 22 years into the new one. And you also have all of the costs associated with the people to maintain those, right? And those two, are people that are closer to the age of retirement potentially. A lot of younger people are not interested in learning those old technologies because they might not see the market value for them. And so, the debt that keeps accumulating, the risk that keeps accumulating is absolutely, it's beyond exponential, it's asymptotic. And it precludes you from really being everything that you can be from an IT standpoint in terms of fulfilling the mission.
Thank you. All right, anyone else before we begin our wrap-ups? Okay, well, unfortunately, Guido had to drop. He had something he needed to take care of, so we won't get to hear from him. But that being said, I would like to hear from each of our panelists on a key takeaway that you would really like our audience to walk away having a better understanding of. So anything that you'd like to leave with them as parting words, this would be the time to share that information here as we get closer to our 2:30 mark. So let's begin with Kevin, please. What is it that you would like to leave our audience with today?
Hey, I think my closing point might be to consider how IT operates as an enterprise in partnership with the customer. We may be separate organizations, we have separate bosses, we may have separate funding lines as we do in VA, and we're not just service providers to the business. We have to work arm in arm with the enterprise, with our customers, with the business units to ensure that we're delivering the products that our customers need us to do for the benefit of our end users. In our case, our nation's heroes, our veterans, our population, our citizens, and our taxpayers. We can't do that in stovepipes. We've got to do that by working together. These kinds of information sharing opportunities are great, but we've got to do that within our own walls as well.
Thank you. That was great. And Sean, let's go over to you next.
Sure. The one thing I would say, Kirsten, is budgets are going to change year to year. Kevin mentioned that earlier. Guidance and technology change quickly. One thing that is enduring is core mission. IT has the opportunity each and every day to make the core mission just a little bit better. Happens through collaboration with our employees and our vendors and our customers. And that's exciting because as we talked about in this webinar, whether we're paying benefits to entitled beneficiaries, keeping them healthy, or protecting them from natural disasters, our core mission is vital to this nation, and it makes a difference to millions of Americans every day.
Absolutely. Thank you. And over to you, Andre, parting words.
So I always look at our IT challenges and our IT environments in a manner akin to biological evolution. There's always the need to create abstraction layers in order to get to higher and higher levels of functioning. Homo sapiens did not rise overnight. It was built on multicellular organisms becoming small animals and then moving from that into primates and eventually to Homo sapiens. The same is true of our systems. The more attention that we have to pay to components that provide no benefit to the mission at hand and that are commodity, the less we are focusing on the brain, on the intellect, on the upper layers of functioning that really provide the value. And so when you look at the fact that that the cloud, to a large degree, provides some of those abstraction layers. We need to leverage them as much as possible to ensure that, you know, the equation about what we're spending on things that do not provide value and the ultimate mission value that is provided by the application layer, we need to continually change the ratio from one to the other so that we can be agile and continue to move at the speed that society is moving, at the speed that culture is moving, and at the speed that we need to move in order to remain relevant. And the last one would be that, as demonstrated by this panel, I think that the amount of knowledge and talent and expertise in the federal government is absolutely incredible, and throughout history has been underestimated because I think that there is enormous innovation being driven from the halls of government buildings, and that is only accelerating.
Well said. Thank you. And Dave, we will end it with you, sir.
So it's hard to follow Andre because his comments were just fantastic, but I'm just going to circle back that IT situational awareness is critical. You got to know what you have, you got to know what you're paying for and how you're paying for it, and you got to know who is using it. And this problem is exacerbated because in most central agencies, despite the fact that there is a CIO, money comes in lots of different ways, and there is centrally funded organizational IT, there's mission IT, there's customer funded IT, and your IT situational awareness has to cut across all of those so the best decisions can be made for the organization, regardless of where the money's coming from.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, I want to thank our panelists again for being here and sharing with us all of your amazing insight, and the folks at home for asking questions and being here to share these messages. And of course, I also want to thank our partners at Flexera for helping us put on today's event. So if you liked this content, I'm sure you will like our next webinar, which is on making every second count when recovering from cyber outages. So you can go ahead and register for that one on our website as well. But I really look forward to seeing you all again at the next one. And thanks so much again for your time. Have a great week.